It happened in the middle of the dance floor, under the glow of chandeliers and the eyes of hundreds of guests. My own daughter lifted her hand and struck me across the face. The sound cut sharper than the music, and for a split second, the entire room froze. All I could hear was the echo of that slap and the sudden silence that followed. My name is Linda Carter. I am 67 years old, and I built Carter Dynamics from nothing into a company that employed more than 1,000 people. I thought I understood power, loyalty, and legacy. But nothing prepared me for the sting of my daughter's rejection, not just of me, but of everything I had ever tried to give her. This isn't just a story about a wedding gone wrong. It's about betrayal, greed, and the unraveling of family ties I thought were unbreakable. You're going to hear how I offered her the keys to a $3,000 future and how she demanded cash instead. You'll hear how she humiliated me in front of strangers and how her choices led federal agents to knock on my door. Stay with me, because before we get to the chaos, I want to take you back to the gift I thought would change her life forever. I still remember the smell of roasted beans and the soft jazz playing in that little cafe downtown. It was a crisp Cleveland afternoon, the kind where the windows fog up just enough to make the world outside feel far away. I had chosen that place carefully. I wanted the moment to be intimate, personal. I wanted to give Maya something that wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a future. After decades of building Carter Dynamics, I had finally reached the point where I could begin letting go, little by little. I had arranged everything so that Maya would receive 45% of the company, while I held on to 51% to keep operations stable. On paper, that stake would mean roughly $2,000 every year in dividends, security that most people only dream of. But beyond the numbers, it was supposed to be a symbol, my way of saying, this is your legacy. One day, this will all be yours. I expected her eyes to light up, maybe even a hug, or at the very least, a moment of gratitude. Instead, she brushed it off, as if I'd offered her an old photo album. She quickly redirected the conversation to her wedding, insisting Evan's family had it all covered, almost dismissing me from the picture. I sat there with my coffee cooling in front of me, smiling faintly, but inside I felt the first crack of unease. A small, sharp voice whispered that maybe she didn't want the same future I had imagined for her. I pushed it aside, telling myself it was nerves, the stress of planning a wedding. But I would soon learn just how wrong I was, because what she really wanted wasn't ownership. It was cash. She didn't even pause before saying it. I laid the paperwork across the table, the culmination of decades of sacrifice, and she pushed it aside like a napkin. What she wanted wasn't ownership, not a seat at the table I had built with my own hands. She wanted cash, $30 million. I remember that number hitting me like a physical blow. 30 million. I could almost see it hovering in the air between us. Too heavy. Too absurd to believe. She spoke of it as if it were nothing more than a wedding gift. Money she and Evan could use to buy an estate in Napa Valley. The logic was staggering. Why trade a steady $2 million a year in dividend security that would outlast me for one windfall that would strip away the company's stability and, in many ways, my life's work? But what cut deepest wasn't the number itself. It was the way she framed it. She told me, almost casually, that I didn't need the money. That, at my age, what could I possibly do with it? The implication was cruel, that because I was 67, my value had already been spent, that everything I had earned was simply waiting to be passed on. I sat there, torn between fury and heartbreak. My daughter wasn't asking for partnership. She was demanding liquidation. She didn't want to stand on what I had built. She wanted to cash it out. I left that cafe in silence, the contract still folded in my bag, my heart heavier than I can describe. And over the next 2 weeks, as the wedding drew closer, that demand became a storm cloud I couldn't escape. The 2 weeks before the wedding felt less like preparation and more like being trapped in a pressure cooker. Every morning, my phone would light up with Maya's name, and each call was the same, not about how I was feeling, not about flowers or seating charts, not even about her dress. Just the same relentless push for 30 million. Her voice had lost all warmth, and with each ring, I felt a little more drained, a little more invisible. I tried to ground myself in reason. I sat with my attorney, who laid it out in stark terms. Paying that kind of money would gut the company, unravel everything I had spent a lifetime building. Then my sister, always sharper at reading people than I was, whispered her suspicions that Maya's sudden fixation didn't sound like her, that perhaps someone else was steering her words. I wanted to believe the wedding would soften the edges, that standing in the glow of family, Maya might rediscover gratitude. But then there was Evan. He was polished, always perfectly turned out, but his eyes never warmed. They scanned a room like ledgers, calculating value. I could feel myself being weighed every time he looked at me, not as a mother, but as an asset. Through it all, I tried to hold on to some small thread of dignity. I pressed the navy blue dress Maya had approved, smoothing each crease like I could iron out the tension in my chest. That dress became my anchor, my quiet attempt to keep the peace, even as the storm gathered. And by the time the rehearsal dinner arrived, the storm finally had a voice. The rehearsal dinner was staged like a magazine spread. Evan's family country club gleamed with polished mahogany, crystal glasses, and waiters who moved like shadows. Every table was draped in linen so white it almost glared under the chandeliers. On the surface, it was elegance. Beneath it, I felt the ground shifting. When Evan's father rose to toast, his words were honeyed, wrapped in charm, but they cut sharper than any insult. He praised me publicly for my extraordinary generosity. The room applauded, smiles all around. Yet my heart sank, because what he implied was not generosity at all, but surrender to a $30 million demand I had never agreed to. I smiled through the burn in my chest, clapping along, my face frozen in place. Inside, I boiled. Later, on the terrace, I thought I could breathe. Instead, I found myself cornered. Evan joined me, his voice smooth, almost too polite, but every word carried weight, like a hand pressing against my back. He spoke of family harmony, of promises already set in motion, of how unfortunate it would be if expectations went unfulfilled. He never raised his voice. He didn't have to. The menace was in the softness, the certainty. In that moment, I finally saw him clearly, not just ambitious, but calculated, dangerous. This was no simple clash between mother and daughter. This was something else entirely, something darker. And as I stood there in the night air, clutching my glass to steady my hands, I realized the wedding day itself might not bring resolution. It might bring exposure. The reception sparkled like a dream. Soft lights strung across the hall. Music floating in the air, glasses clinking in rhythm. For a moment, it almost felt safe, as though the tension of the past weeks had dissolved into celebration. But then Maya took the microphone. Her smile was radiant, her voice confident, and her words fell like a stone in water. She announced to 300 guests that I had gifted her and Evan $30 million for their Napa estate. The room erupted. Applause thundered. People rose to their feet, and I sat frozen, my chest hollow. I hadn't promised that gift. I hadn't agreed to anything close. Yet the weight of all those eyes bore down on me, demanding I confirm the fantasy. Inside, I fought with myself. Stay silent and preserve the illusion, or break it and risk shattering everything in public view. My hands trembled as I pushed back my chair. I rose, my knees unsteady, but my resolve gathering with every breath. I steadied my voice and told the truth. I had offered her a 45% stake in Carter Dynamics, with dividends that would ensure stability for life. But she had refused. The applause died mid-clap. The silence that followed was suffocating. Faces shifted from joy to confusion, then to disbelief. Maya's eyes widened, her smile collapsing into horror. In that instant, I knew the damage could not be undone. Whatever hope I had of keeping this quiet, of mending it behind closed doors, was gone. The air crackled with the knowledge that the next moment would not be graceful, it would be explosive. The microphone was still warm in my hand when Maya stormed forward. Her face twisted with fury I had never seen before. The ballroom was silent, every guest frozen between disbelief and fascination. Then, without warning, her hand cut through the air and struck my cheek with a crack that echoed louder than the music ever had. The sting was immediate, sharp, and humiliating. My head turned with the blow, my body stumbling back a step as gasps rippled through the crowd. I tasted iron at the corner of my lip. But worse than the pain was the shame. My own daughter, on her wedding day, had chosen to strike me before hundreds of witnesses. I tried to steady myself, but the room spun. In that suspended silence, I could feel the whispers starting, already rewriting the scene, already deciding who was right, who was wrong. To them, she was the beautiful bride defending her moment. To them, I was the jealous mother who had ruined it. Two ushers moved toward me, their hands firm yet oddly gentle as they guided me away from the stage. Not Maya, not Evan. Me. The one who had been struck was the one escorted out, like a disruption to be removed so the fairy tale could continue unblemished. As I stepped into the night air, the weight of humiliation pressed harder than the slap itself. The music swelled again behind me, muffled by the walls, as though nothing had happened, and in that lonely, stinging silence, I realized the story wasn't over. If anything, it had only begun. The truth behind their cruelty demanded to be uncovered. The house felt colder than I remembered. I unlocked the door and stepped inside, and the silence was almost violent compared to the noise I had just left behind. No music, no clinking glasses, no polite applause, just the sound of my own breath in an empty hallway. I dropped my heels near the entryway and sank into the couch, still in the navy dress Maya had chosen. The fabric, once a symbol of dignity, now felt like a costume I had been forced to wear for a performance that ended in humiliation. My cheek still throbbed, a dull reminder of the slap, but the deeper ache was the betrayal. A daughter I had raised, loved, and prepared for stability had turned me into an enemy in front of strangers. For a while, I sat motionless, staring at the darkened window. But grief has a strange way of sharpening into resolve. I turned on my laptop and began searching not for comfort, but for answers. Evan Langford. His name appeared in old financial filings, in dissolved partnerships, in lawsuits that had quietly disappeared. Former colleagues whispered stories, fragments of a reputation carefully buried. There were marriages that merged into fortunes, investments that drained just as quickly. It wasn't just Maya's entitlement I was staring at. It was Evan's strategy, his family's blueprint for siphoning wealth under the mask of love. The more I read, the clearer it became this was never just about a wedding gift. It was about control, about empire building at my expense. By the time dawn edged through the blinds, suspicion had hardened into certainty. I couldn't stay silent. I needed voices outside my own. Which is why, a few days later, I agreed to meet an old business contact at a coffee shop, someone who knew the Langfords better than I ever did. The coffee shop was nearly empty, the kind of place where voices seemed to fold into the hum of the espresso machine. I chose a corner table, far from the windows, and wrapped my hands around a cup that had gone lukewarm before my guest even arrived. When he finally slid into the chair across from me, his eyes carried the kind of hesitation that told me this meeting was both necessary and dangerous. At first, he spoke in fragments, circling the subject as though saying too much might summon trouble. But piece by piece, the story I had begun to suspect spilled out. Evan's family had a reputation, marriages that began with glamour and ended in financial wreckage, partnerships drained of assets, debts quietly shifted onto spouses, reputations dismantled once the money was gone. It wasn't speculation. It was a pattern, repeated enough times to leave a trail only those who had lived through it could see. Hearing it confirmed was like having the air sucked out of the room. Relief that my instincts had been right, tangled with grief that my daughter was caught in a web I hadn't seen soon enough. And beneath it all sat guilt, a heavy, crushing guilt that I had prepared her for stability, but failed to protect her from danger disguised as love. The coffee grew cold between us, untouched. My associate leaned back, his silence heavier than his words. I realized then that this wasn't just Maya's mistake or youthful arrogance. It was a calculated move by a family that had perfected the art of extraction. As I walked out into the sharp Cleveland air, the truth no longer felt like suspicion. It was certainty. And I knew the next step wasn't whispers in a cafe, it was hard proof. The kind only paper trails and federal eyes could provide. The papers came to me in fragments, at first printouts slipped from databases, filings tucked away in county records, quiet tips from people who had once crossed paths with Evan's world. I spread them across my dining table late one night, the same table where I'd once celebrated birthdays with my daughter. Now it looked more like a crime scene. Shell companies, each one nothing more than a name and a mailbox. Transfers routed through layers of accounts until the trail blurred, but not enough to hide intent. And then, I saw it plans drawn up to dissolve Carter Dynamics within 2 years of the marriage. The company I had built from the ground up. The company meant to secure my daughter's future, reduced to a target on their balance sheet. My stomach turned as I realized this hadn't been about love, not even about family. It was a long con, rehearsed and precise, with Maya's name written into the script as if she were a line item. The marriage was leverage. I felt horror crash over me in waves, grief for her, anger for myself, shame that I hadn't seen it sooner. And then, just as the weight of it threatened to crush me, came the knock, sharp, deliberate, undeniable. When I opened the door, 2 federal investigators stood there, badges glinting under the porch light. They didn't have to explain much, the documents in my hands had already told the story. Evan and his family were under active investigation. For the first time in months, I wasn't just a mother drowning in betrayal. I was a witness, standing at the edge of something far larger than my own heartbreak. The fallout was coming, and it would be nothing like triumph. The knock should have felt like vindication. Federal agents, documents in hand, proof that what I had feared was true. Evan's mask was finally stripped away, and justice was moving forward. But when the door closed, silence filled the house again. Silence and the weight of loss. Maya will not speak to me. In her eyes, I am the destroyer of her marriage, not the one who saved her from ruin. She turned her back so completely that even the sound of her voice feels like something I have to remember, rather than something I still know. Family dinners are fractured some quietly, thank me for exposing the truth. Others whisper that I humiliated her, that I should have stayed quiet. It is a strange thing to be right and still feel like you have lost everything that matters. I sit at my desk, the company files neatly stacked, dividends still flowing, the empire intact. On paper, I survived. But survival is not the same as joy. The halls of my home echo with absence, and every victory tastes like ashes. Truth protected the legacy, but it could not protect my daughter's love. That is the fallout no one warns you about. Justice comes with its own kind of loneliness. And yet, as the months would show, not all inheritance is written in numbers or contracts. Some lessons come differently. With time, 6 months have passed, seasons shifted, and with them, so did I. My house is the same quiet, orderly, filled with echoes rather than voices. Carter Dynamics hums along, stronger than ever, a testament to years of work that even betrayal could not dismantle. On the surface, everything looks intact. Yet when I sit at the breakfast table with only my own coffee to pour, the silence tells another story. Maya has not returned. Her absence is its own kind of presence, heavy and undeniable. Some wounds are deeper than court filings or public shame. They live in the space between mother and daughter, in the things unsaid. I used to imagine inheritance as assets passed neatly from one generation to the next. Now, I see it differently. What I inherited from this ordeal was not money, nor status, nor even peace. I inherited resilience, the kind that grows when the ground gives way and you keep standing. I inherited independence, the ability to live without needing approval from those you love most. And I inherited clarity, the sharp truth that family bonds can fracture. And what we pass on may be scars as much as blessings. It is a bittersweet legacy. To be right, but to lose warmth. To keep everything I built, but wonder if I failed at what mattered most. Perhaps inheritance is not about what we leave behind in accounts, but what survives in the lessons and the strength others either accept or reject. And that thought leads me to one final reflection. When I look back on everything, the slap, the silence, the investigations, the lonely mornings after I realized this was never just about money. It was about love twisted by expectation, about how family, the people we let closest to our hearts, can sometimes cut the deepest wounds. Standing up for myself cost me more than I ever imagined. I kept my company. I kept my independence. But I lost the simple comfort of hearing my daughter's voice at the end of the day. That is the price of truth, and it is heavier than any balance sheet. And yet, I would not change my choice. Because there comes a time when we have to decide if love means surrendering who we are, or if it means holding steady even when it hurts. In that decision, I found a kind of strength I never knew I had, a different kind of inheritance, one that no one can steal. Maybe my story will echo something in your own life. Maybe you felt the weight of silence at your dinner table, or the sting of being misunderstood by someone you love. if it does. I hope you take this with you. You are not alone. And standing firm in your truth is never wasted. If this story touched you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave your thoughts. I'd love to know how it resonates with you. And if you found meaning here, stay connected. There are more stories, more lessons, more journeys we can walk together.